When we speak of emotional conflict and redemption in the context of a man facing execution, we are not merely exploring the legal or societal consequences of his crime, but the inner storm that brews within him as he confronts the finality of his life and the realization that he can no longer undo what he has done. A condemned man, when stripped of all masks, wealth, or societal positions, becomes nothing more than a soul standing naked before the weight of his conscience. The only remnants he clings to are often not power, not money, not recognition, but rather the small fragments of love that remain untouched by the brutality of his actions. In this story, that fragment is his dog, the creature that symbolizes innocence, loyalty, and a love that neither judges nor condemns. It is through this bond that we can trace the contours of his emotional conflict, because on one hand, he is branded by society as a criminal worthy of death, yet on the other hand, he still bears the capacity to feel deep love and to yearn for forgiveness, even if that forgiveness comes not from the courts or his victims, but from the gentle eyes of his faithful companion. The conflict begins with memory. The man, sitting in his cell, would think back to the days when his dog was nothing more than a playful pup tugging at his shoelaces, chasing after sticks, or curling up beside him in moments of solitude. Those memories stand in sharp contrast to the cold bars that now confine him, and it is this contrast that carves wounds deeper than any punishment could. He knows the world sees him only as the sum of his crimes, yet in those moments of recollection, he sees himself as he once was, someone who could laugh freely, someone who once cared enough to take in a vulnerable creature and nurture it, someone who had not yet been swallowed whole by the choices that dragged him into darkness. This is where redemption begins its quiet whisper, because redemption does not always come in grand gestures or public pardons, but often in the acknowledgement that one has strayed from who they truly were and in the longing to touch even the smallest remnant of purity before the end. The dog represents more than companionship, it embodies forgiveness without condition. Unlike people, the dog never asked him why he did what he did, never questioned his morality, never placed upon him the label of murderer, thief, or sinner. The dog loved him through hunger and through comfort, through days of laughter and nights of despair, through the stench of liquor and the trembling of regret. That unwavering loyalty becomes a mirror, showing him the kind of love he never managed to give the world but which the world still gave him in the form of this creature. The man's heart aches not only because he misses the dog, but because in its presence he remembers the better fragments of himself, and that reminder pierces deeper than any blade of judgment. This is the heart of his emotional conflict. He is torn between the monster the world says he is and the human he once knew himself to be, reflected back at him by the innocence of his dog. As the day of execution approaches, the conflict intensifies. Every sound of the prison gates, every rattle of the guard's keys, every echo of footsteps in the corridor becomes a reminder that time is slipping away. In that shrinking space of hours and minutes, he does not think of revenge, nor of escape, nor of challenging the law. He thinks only of the soft fur he once stroked, the familiar bark that once greeted him, the eyes that once looked at him as though he were the center of the universe. He wonders if the dog remembers him. He wonders if the dog still waits at the door, tail wagging, not knowing that its master is chained far away. He wonders if the dog would still recognize him after years apart, after the grime of prison life has reshaped his face and hollowed his spirit. And perhaps most painfully, he wonders if he even deserves to see that dog again, if he has any right to stand before a creature of such purity and receive love when he has spread so much harm. This question tears him apart, because redemption is never truly about being forgiven by others, but about forgiving oneself, and this is the one thing he cannot manage to do. Yet even in this struggle, the last wish to see the dog reveals something deeply human. For many condemned men, the final request is food, music, prayer, or silence. For him, it is not a thing that feeds the body but one that feeds the soul. That wish exposes the truth that beneath the layers of crime and punishment, there exists a man still yearning for connection, still desperate to touch something uncorrupted before he disappears into nothingness. It is this wish that reveals the fragility of human nature. We are all bound by mistakes, some greater than others, yet the need to be seen, to be loved, and to hold on to a fragment of innocence does not vanish even in the shadow of death. This is why his dog becomes his salvation, for in asking to see the animal one last time, he is not merely asking to indulge a sentimental memory, he is asking for a glimpse of redemption before the final curtain falls. The guards and officials around him may scoff, seeing only a criminal's desperate plea. They may interpret his longing as weakness or manipulation, but what they fail to see is that this request is not made to lessen his fear of death, but to ease his fear of dying without reconciliation. The dog, to him, is not an accessory of his past, but the last anchor to the man he once believed himself to be, the man who could give and receive love without condition. And in that anchor lies the possibility of redemption, because if the dog can look at him once more with eyes unclouded by judgment, perhaps he can die believing that he was not entirely lost, that there was still a piece of him worth loving. The emotional conflict grows sharper when he reflects on the contrast between his victims and his dog. He knows those he wronged cannot look at him without anger or grief. He knows their wounds are deep, their pain is unhealed, and he cannot undo that. This knowledge weighs on him with crushing force, reminding him that redemption cannot erase consequence. Yet the dog stands as a silent contradiction, because here is one being who suffered none of his violence, who carries no scar from his actions, and who therefore offers him a form of love untainted by his sins. This is not justice, but it is mercy, and mercy is often the thin line that allows a soul to depart with some semblance of peace. His conflict is whether he deserves even that mercy, and though he cannot answer it with certainty, the hope of it becomes enough to sustain him through his final days. This internal struggle reflects a truth that resonates beyond the prison walls. Redemption often lies not in erasing the past but in recognizing its weight and still daring to reach for something pure. For the condemned man, the dog is not just a companion, it is the embodiment of a world untouched by judgment, a reminder of who he could have been had he not strayed, and perhaps even a bridge to forgiveness that no human voice could ever grant him. His last wish is thus not simply sentimental, it is profoundly spiritual, because in those final moments, he seeks to reconcile with himself through the gaze of a creature that has never stopped loving him. That is the essence of his emotional conflict, and the fragile spark of redemption that flickers even in the face of death. When a man facing execution requests something as simple as seeing his dog one last time, most expect the event to be straightforward, a bittersweet fulfillment of a final human need before the inevitable. What no one anticipates, however, is how such a moment can ripple outward, altering the course of destiny in ways that defy logic, rules, and even the harsh machinery of justice. The unexpected turn of fate lies not in the request itself but in what happens when the request is granted, when a condemned man and his loyal companion are reunited, and the world, for a fleeting instant, is forced to confront a truth it did not wish to see. In that meeting lies the seed of transformation, for not only does the man change, but those who witness it find themselves changed as well, as though the walls of the prison and the weight of law are not immune to the silent power of love and loyalty. The prison officials arrange the meeting reluctantly. Some laugh at the sentimentality of it, others sneer at the absurdity of bending protocol for a man who has already been judged beyond redemption. Yet there is something disarming about the simplicity of the wish. They have dealt with men who asked for extravagant meals, strange demands, or even silence, but rarely has anyone asked for the company of a creature that cannot speak, cannot testify, cannot defend. It is this humility that makes the officials uneasy, because it strips away the stereotype of the hardened criminal who dies without remorse. A man who asks to see his dog is not asking for luxury, nor for power, nor for any indulgence that might soften his punishment. He is asking for connection, and in that request there is something profoundly human that unsettles even the most hardened guard. When the dog is finally brought into the prison courtyard, the unexpected turn of fate begins. The animal, having been separated for years, does not hesitate. It does not sniff cautiously, nor shy away from the man who now wears chains and carries the scent of despair. Instead, it bounds forward with tail wagging and eyes bright, as though no time has passed, as though the man it remembers has never left. This moment pierces the silence like a blade, for everyone who watches is struck by the rawness of it. There is no judgment in the animal, no hesitation, no fear of the uniformed guards or the steel gates. There is only recognition and love. The condemned man falls to his knees, and the chains rattle against the stone, but in that instant he does not feel them, because the warmth of the dog's body against his chest dissolves the weight of everything else. He weeps, and the weeping is not just grief but something deeper, as though the dam of years has burst. The turn of fate is not only in the reunion itself but in the effect it has on those who witness it. Guards who have long prided themselves on their stoicism feel their throats tighten. Officials who have condemned hundreds without hesitation feel their certainties waver. Even the warden, a man who has spent decades in the service of law, feels the uncomfortable truth rising within him, that this man is not entirely the sum of his crimes, that there is something within him that still deserves to be called human. And it is this recognition that begins to unravel the boundaries between justice and mercy, between punishment and redemption. The man himself undergoes a change in that moment. Until then, he had been haunted by the question of whether he even deserved to see his dog, whether he had any right to be loved after what he had done. Yet the dog's unhesitating affection answers the question in a way no priest, no lawyer, no jury ever could. The dog does not weigh his sins against him, does not calculate the morality of the request, does not measure the harm he has caused. It simply loves, and in that love, the man feels something he thought he had lost forever, the possibility of forgiveness. This is the unexpected turn, for instead of going to his death burdened by despair, he now carries the seed of peace, the faint but undeniable belief that he is not beyond redemption. The authorities, however, find themselves shaken. The law is designed to be rigid, clear, unyielding, but the sight of a condemned man being loved with such purity raises questions they would rather not confront. For some, it is a momentary crack in their armor, quickly sealed with indifference. But for others, it lingers, gnawing at the edges of their conscience. They wonder if execution, so often described as justice, is truly as absolute as they once believed. They wonder if mercy has a place even in the darkest corners of law. They wonder if perhaps the system is blind not only to innocence but also to humanity. The unexpected turn deepens when the dog refuses to leave after the visit. It sits beside the man, growling at guards who try to pull it away, pressing its body against him as though to protect him from the inevitable. No amount of coaxing can move it, and when finally forced away, it howls with a grief that echoes through the prison walls. The sound unsettles everyone, because it is not the cry of an animal alone but the voice of something larger, as though nature itself protests the fate of the man. This moment sparks whispers among the guards, rumors among the prisoners, and doubt among the officials. Some begin to argue that perhaps the man should be granted clemency, not because he is innocent, but because something about his bond with the animal reveals a humanity they cannot ignore. This is where fate twists further. A petition emerges, not from lawyers or family members, but from ordinary people who hear of the dog's loyalty and are moved by it. The story spreads, stirring the public in ways the cold details of his crime never did. People who once saw only a criminal now see a man who is loved, and that love forces them to reconsider their judgment. Mercy becomes a topic of debate, and officials who once felt certain of their decision now face pressure from voices they cannot easily silence. In this way, the simple wish to see his dog sets in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted, events that challenge the finality of death and the rigidity of law. For the man himself, the unexpected turn of fate lies not in the possibility of pardon but in the transformation of his spirit. He no longer sees himself solely as a criminal awaiting death. He sees himself as someone who has been loved unconditionally, someone who, even in his worst state, has not been abandoned. This changes how he faces the end. Instead of despair, he feels gratitude. Instead of bitterness, he feels peace. And though the system may not alter its course, he has already been changed by the encounter, already found redemption in the gaze of his loyal companion. This is the deepest twist of fate, that even if nothing changes outwardly, everything changes within. The dog, too, becomes a symbol. To the prison, it is a disruption, a reminder that love can intrude even into the darkest places. To the man, it is salvation. To the public, it is proof that humanity exists even in the condemned. And in this way, the dog becomes the unexpected force that alters everything, not through words or arguments, but through the simple act of loving without hesitation. The execution, once seen as a final act of justice, now carries with it the weight of doubt, the sting of tragedy, and the haunting question of whether the system is blind to the truths that lie beyond legal judgment. It is in this way that the man's last wish spirals into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. What began as a personal request for a moment of connection becomes a challenge to the very nature of justice, a story that transforms hearts, unsettles certainties, and reveals the power of loyalty to alter destiny. The unexpected turn of fate lies not in the avoidance of death, but in the revelation of life within the condemned, a revelation sparked by the presence of a dog who refused to forget, who refused to let go, who forced the world to see what it wanted to ignore.